we'll talk more about that. We've got plenty of time, so we'll talk about that. If you have a story, please let us know. But right now, it's time for the Future Politics panel.
The Future Politics panel.
Well, I'm delighted to be joined this morning, although albeit remotely, by Jake Swinburne, who's deputy editor of the Hardy blog, also Jason Reed, UK lead of Young Voices. Good morning to you both.
Morning, David.
Morning. In chorus. They do it in chorus. Right, let's start, shall we, at the beginning. I mean, this is a really interesting story. We talked a little bit with Claire Muldoon this morning about this particular story. Excuse me. This is about Suella Braverman. She has signalled she's prepared to ignore European judges to start these deportation flights to Rwanda. So this is... Excuse me, she essentially said proposed new powers for ministers to disregard temporary injunctions by the ECHR were crucial, excuse me, to delivering this pledge. I mean, clearly the Conservative Party has made this a pledge. They have said they will actually reduce the number of illegal migrants, and this Rule 39 order, which is being called the pyjama injunction, which has been used by the European judge, this one solitary judge, to stop that flight to Rwanda taking off. Clearly, the government is now not only talking strong, being urged by the backbenchers to take more decisive action, and this is what's happening. Jake, where do you stand on this?
Well, if I'm honest with you, David, I think this is just another excuse that the government's used for ages, just to demonise immigrants. And, well, if we have a British government that's willing to break European and international law to appease a culture war and not actually deal with the issue of asylum seekers, I don't see what point of it is. It's just gesturing to the right-wing press at this point.
Is it? Hang on a minute. Is it really? You know, the fact is that it costs £8 million a day, £2.5 billion a year. The British people have made it pretty clear they're unhappy. They're being treated worse than some of these illegal migrants that are being put up in hotels. So let me just ask you, Jake, surely the government has to do something. Also, you mentioned the ECHR. We actually don't have to abide by that. Isn't actually the answer that either we leave the ECHR or the government says, look, we're a sovereign democratic country and actually we'll do what we want?
Well, I mean, technically we can do what we want, but I would point out we set up the ECHR along with another, assortment of European countries in the Second World War. But the whole Rwanda policy is pointless in any case because we have, 1% of asylum claims processed in the last year?
Indeed.
So we're going to deal with 1% of the problem by spending a ridiculous amount of money to send them to a country that's worse than the one that they're coming to and probably worse than the one they came from in the first place.
Jason,
I don't see the point.
Jason, let me bring you in here. I mean, clearly there is political pressure on Suella Braverman here. The fact is, this is all part of this illegal migration bill where the government is determined to get on top of the small boat crisis. The scale of this is absolutely extraordinary. 166,000 in the backlog. We had 45,000 coming in last year. Now, Suella Braverman, I think, is finally talking tough. She set out all of these measures. Would you agree with Jake there that actually this is a distraction, or do you think this is actually really important to send a very clear message that actually if you come here illegally you will be deported?
Well, the problem I've got with this is that last I checked, we do live in a democracy in Britain. I don't really understand why we are still giving way to these judgments from anonymous judges elsewhere in the world, quite possibly in their pyjamas. We have absolutely no idea who these people are. They're not accountable to anyone. We have courts in this country that are perfectly capable of dealing with these kinds of issues. If the government was in a battle with some human rights campaigners in courts in this country, that would be a completely different matter. But there is no need for us to keep giving way to the ECHR on issues like this, whether you agree with the Rwanda policy or not. The fact is something has to be done. When it comes to the immigration question, immigration is good for the country. On the legal side, we do need it. But at the same time, it's not good for anyone to have boats crossing the channel, least of all for the people in those boats who are, putting themselves at extraordinary risk. We don't want this situation to continue. No one wants it to continue. We've got to have something to break through the bureaucratic logjam. But whatever solution the government comes up with, you have people on the left who say, oh, no, well, this isn't ideal. Well, nothing's ideal, but we've got to do something. And Suella Braverman is completely within her rights to do this. It seems she has a huge amount of public support to do this because people are fed up of the situation. It's costing us a huge amount of money, if nothing else. As you say, keeping people in hotels at huge cost. It's just not a sustainable situation, and we've got to be doing something about it, and real action is what people want to see.
How big an issue is this, Jason, for the Conservative Party? Because I get the sense that Suella Braverman has realised there is this backlash coming from her own side, saying if you do not go far enough with this illegal migration bill, then we are not in a position to support you. There will also be a massive showdown. I heard from Claire Fox, Baroness Fox, who is in the House of Lords, and of course they're preparing for a massive battle over this.
It's incredibly serious for the Conservative Party. Rishi Sunak, of course, has staked his flag very clearly. He's not minced his words. He has said, we are going to stop the boats. Not we'll try, not we might stop the boats at some point, after the next election. We will stop the boats, is what he said. And he's tasked Suella Braverman and the Home Office with doing that. Now, that's no easy task. Of course, we've talked already about the huge backlog of asylum applications in the Home Office. Clearly, there's a lot that needs to be changed there, as well as the Rwanda policy. It's not going to be a silver bullet. We've got to get much better at processing these applications, at not drowning in paperwork and not having this situation where we've got huge queues of people waiting to hear back. But this is something that people want action on. We know, of course, heading into the election that the Conservative Party are going to be targeting those famed Red Wall voters from 2019. This seems to be an issue that resonates a lot with certain parts of the country. They are going to have to show they are going to have to come across as credible, that they really can do something about this. Because at the moment, what we're hearing is a lot of words and no actions because of judges in pyjamas who keep standing in the way.
So let's just talk about the bill itself, Jake. So the bill gives the Home Secretary powers to detain any migrant entering the UK illegally and then swiftly remove them to their own country or indeed a third safe state such as Rwanda with virtually no recourse to legal human action on human rights or other grounds after they've left. Now, just generally, do you support this kind of legislation? Basically saying that we're pushing through this legislation because we have to do something. And I think Jason makes a really good point, which is about crossing the boats crossing the channel is incredibly dangerous for those who are on it. These poor people are being used by the people smugglers, and we have to stop that. We have to break the business mould here, and we have to send a very strong signal too. So are you generally in favour, Jake?
I mean, I'm in favour of protecting people who've been exploited by people smuggling gangs, but I don't think sending them off to a third world country after we found them is going to stop the bit.
All right, what about, let's leave Rwanda out of it. What about if we said, OK, we're just going to deport you back to a safe country?
Well, they're already in a safe country. They've come to a safe country.
But people don't want them in the United Kingdom. That's the whole point.
They were in a safe country.
Well, there's not much you can do. The point is that we should be working across the channel with our European partners to stop these gangs.
Well, I might suggest to you that maybe our European partners aren't playing very nicely. I mean, the thing is, France is a safe country as far the last time I looked.
Well, if you look at the way we've treated them, the Europeans, that is, over the last few years, are you surprised they don't want to work?
In what way?
In what way? I mean, the way we dealt with the entire Brexit negotiation, we've basically torn up our international...
Well, they played us.
Already in tatters. And now the Home Secretary says she wants to pull out of the European Convention on Human Rights.
Well, to be fair, other political parties have said that. She hasn't said that, actually.
Well, it's been suggested inside our own party, and they like to give to the backbenchers all the time. So, if it might be government policy by next week, for all we know.
Can I just
about Jason's point about judges, by the way, I'd just like to point out that we do live in a democracy. However, all of the judges in this country are also anonymous. None of them are elected either. I think the only issue he has is that they're European judges, not British judges.
I just want to pick you up on what you said about Brexit, obviously, because that got my hackles up slightly because I was involved. But you said we treated the Europeans badly, did we?
I'd say we treat them with quite a bit of contempt.
Based on what?
I think the entire Brexit campaign was basically based on obviously based on an anti-European stance in terms of a bit of a jingoistic idea.
It wasn't. It was not. It was about actually saying, look, I was in the European Parliament. I've never been in such a bureaucratic organisation, which is top down, where you actually had no autonomy for a self-governing state like the United Kingdom. And people were given a very clear question here. Do you want to stay or leave? And they said leave.
And they were lied to, let's be honest. They were lied to about a lot of things. And if you look at the polling, most people agree Brexit's been a disaster.
I don't agree with that. I don't agree. Well, and also, let me level back at you what Anne Widdecombe said at an event I was at last week. She said, well, the reason it's been a failure is because we haven't actually Brexited. And I'd agree with her.
Well, I mean, we've left the European Union, haven't we?
Vaguely.
I mean, we're out. We're not members of the European Union. We're not members of the European
We're
Economic
playing the
Area.
hokey-cokey. We've got one leg in and one leg out.
Well, look, I mean, I don't think that's really true either. I mean, I think we're out. I think there are some things that we still have to face up to. European Convention on Human Rights, which is being touted by a lot of Brexiteers as an issue, isn't an EU institution. It was set before the EU was even created. And it's, the Brexit, Europe in general is such a useful political football in this country because you can just say something's European and a certain section of the electorate will react negatively to it. It's a wonderful little tool to use, but it's not the answer.
Would you like to respond, Jason?
I would, yeah. I find this whole worldview pretty incredible. The French government in particular has, of course, let us down hugely over the migrants issue. We've given them such astonishing amounts of money, billions and billions at a time, and they've not pulled their finger out. They've not made any effort to help on their side. Of course, it is fundamentally their issue. They should be the ones dealing with the people smuggling gangs operating on their coastline. They should be the ones confiscating the boats and so on. And I just find this idea that we've somehow annoyed Europe by taking back our sovereignty, that now they have a right to do whatever they want and they can, not have to cooperate with us on issues of international law and security. It's completely bonkers. The Brexit question is settled. We had a referendum. The British people want to be outside the EU. They might also want to be outside the ECHR. It's not a be-all and end-all that we're not allowed to touch European issues again just in case we annoy someone on the other side of the channel. This is an issue that matters to British people, and the government has the right to deal with it.
It's called diplomacy, Jason.
But I mean, the point is, Jason, that actually, in terms of the treaty that we negotiated, we can't leave the ECHR. It's enshrined in that ridiculous agreement.
I wouldn't be surprised, David, it might be jumping the gun a bit, but I wouldn't be surprised if we see on some parties' manifestos for the election next year a promise to find a way to get out of the ECHR one way or another. That treaty has been renegotiated a few times already by Boris Johnson and others. I'm sure we could do another one. There's no reason at all why we need to just be signing away all our rights and have these pajama injunctions at the last minute, stopping the democratically elected government from doing what it wants to do in this country. It makes no sense at all, and people are right to be angry about it.
Jake, let me move on and talk about something else. We talked a great deal yesterday about Dominic Raab, these accusations, and the fact is we then had this inquiry, and there is an article this morning in one of the newspapers actually saying, where is the Prime Minister? He's been notoriously absent in all of this. He basically got the recommendations given to him. He made no decision at all. He let Dominic Raab resign. He didn't fire him. He didn't come out and say anything. And this article goes on to say that, in fact, Rishi Sunak is using Conservative MPs as cannon fodder to basically guarantee his own success. They feel that the Prime Minister doesn't have anyone's back. Do you think Rishi Sunak is a team player?
I don't think Rishi Sunak's a player in this game at all, actually. I'm of the opinion that Rishi Sunak is Prime Minister practically in name only. He's too scared of his backbench, he's too scared of his cabinet, and he's trying to appeal to a party membership who never supported him in the first place. And so he doesn't actually have a clue what to do. So he just sits around and waits for everyone else to make decisions, and he's just the figurehead.
Jason, would you agree? Is he a Pino, Prime Minister in name only?
I don't agree with that. I would stand up for Rishi Sunak a little bit here. I'm not sure what he could or should have done differently when these allegations
showed
emerged.
Leadership?
Well, he commissioned an independent report, didn't he? When the report came out, perhaps he took a few hours too long to make a decision. But I would say, actually, what happened with Dominic Raab resigning voluntarily, probably ideal from a political standpoint, because the problem is gone. He's gone to the back benches, but at the same time, he doesn't have this issue of, having the image of throwing him to the wolves or anything like that. And so his enemies within the party can't really make much of a claim on that side. I think Rishi Sunak is in an incredibly difficult position when it comes to party unity. He obviously inherited a party that was in total chaos after both Boris Johnson and Liz Truss. And I don't see what he could have done differently here.
Isn't the big problem here, Jason, that we've got a civil service, we called it yesterday the blob, and in fact there's a lot of reference to this. The fact is the civil service, we know for a long time, is pretty much does what it wants to do. I mean, even if you go back to the days of Yes Minister, the minister would say this is what they want to happen, and of course the civil service find ways not to do it. We also know they are establishment. They're quoted as being pure establishment. Isn't the fact that we actually need to reform the civil service, Jason?
Absolutely, the civil service is in crying need of reform. In some ways, I found the most interesting part of the whole Dominic Raab saga was the part of the report that referred to the Brexit department from when Dominic Raab was Brexit secretary a few years ago. But it was just a sort of passing reference that said, oh, well, this was a very long time ago, so we shouldn't go into it. And actually, what it seemed like Dominic Raab was saying at the time was that his wishes were being frustrated by the civil service. He was, of course, at that point trying to negotiate a deal with the EU, trying to get Britain out of the European Union. But it seems, and it was widely reported at the time, that there's a huge amount of pushback from the civil service, which is largely seems to be staffed by Remainers, to what the government agenda of the day actually is. Now, of course, when it comes to bullying, obviously we want a hard line on that when there are cases of bullying. But the problem is that at the same time, we've got to see the other side of the equation, that if there are some malign actors within the civil service who want to politicise legitimate cases of bullying for their own political ends, we are running the risk of empowering those people and making it more difficult for us as voters to see what we want to happen actually happen, because we've got a civil service that is willing and able to obstruct the government.
Well, I want to move on, if I may. So at 3 o'clock today, Jake, we have this test of this emergency alarm at 3 p.m. this afternoon. This is an extraordinary thing, actually. So I've read this on the government website this morning, that you might get an alert for severe flooding, fires, extreme weather. And what's going to happen is your phone is going to wail like a banshee for 10 seconds until you actually turn it off with notifications. There's the noise. That's what we're all going to hear all at once. I have to say, I'm actually having lunch with someone, so that's going to be interesting.
I'm in the theatre.
You're in the theatre? Well, I hope your phone's off.
Of course.
Does it actually... It doesn't come through an off phone?
Not if it's off, no.
Right, OK. So the question I have for you, Jake, I'm just a bit nervous. That's to put it mildly. I'm a bit nervous. The government essentially has enabled this on your phone. When you go into the menu of your phone, there are new things in there that basically allow or presume consent. I haven't opted into that. I've been opted in by the state. Are you worried by that?
Not particularly. I mean, I don't think it's really a massive threat to anybody's civil liberties that the government can essentially send you a text message. I mean, they could do that anyway if they really wanted to. It's just built into your phone. Now, I mean, if you want to turn it off, I think you should be able to turn it off. But then again, if you've got this thing coming in at 3 o'clock, switch your phone off if you don't want to listen to it.
Jason?
Well, look, I think it is a little bit worrying that we've now got this, ever since COVID, this attitude that the government needs to have all the permissions it could possibly want just in case the worst happens. Look, of course, if there is a natural disaster or something, we live in the age of social media. I'm sure we will be able to communicate with each other. The news will reach everybody very quickly anyway. I'm not sure that this is needed. Maybe it's okay to have in the back pocket in the case of emergency, but what worries me is that this seems to have been really poorly thought through. All these issues with this test run have only come to light after it's been announced. You've got people worrying about people who are driving and might end up crashing their cars.
It's the London Marathon.
The London Marathon, pets being alarmed, people in theatres, of course, it's just as serious. But look, nobody seems to have thought this through, and that's really worrying when you've got the government.
Well, there's a surprise. There's a surprise. Very quickly, I just want to finish on this, if I may, Jake. So there are reforms going through about gambling, and there are fears that if you're under 25, you won't be able to gamble because the government says you don't know what you're doing until you're over 25.
Well, I mean, gambling's a ridiculously dangerous game to play in the first place.
Hang on a minute. What happens if you are 24, you think, oh, I fancy a bit of a flutter, I'd like to go gambling, I'm in control of my senses. Do you think it's okay for the government to tell you can't do that?
Oh, no, I can't say I agree with 25 at age limit. I think 18's reasonable because that's when you're an adult, of course, but I think 25 is a bit strange. I'm not really sure why 25 has been chosen, but I think the broader sense of the government being more stringent on gambling is a good thing because it's, it ruins lives, ruins a lot of lives every year. And I think actually the incentive to gamble through this cost of living crisis has risen as people have become more desperate. So it's right that the government's doing something, but 25 seems a bit of a strange age to put it in at.
Jason, your thoughts on this? Are we now just in the middle of a nanny state? You cannot eat this, I have to have menu calorie counts, I can't gamble, I can't have any fun, the government can trigger my phone. Are we actually sleepwalking into some sort of dreadful dystopia?
We are living in an age of a nanny state. I don't think there's any doubt about that anymore. I think it's completely bonkers that we've got this untethered public healthification of every issue you can possibly find, whether it's food or alcohol, smoking, vaping, gambling. The government just wants to make our lives a little bit miserable, it seems. They just want to take away...
Hang on, Dr. Rennie's got... Yes, go on.
I do, because apart from where it really matters, and, you know, when we're talking about children and safeguarding, there's this push from the left to let children as young as 9 self-identify their gender, which Dr. Hilary Cass has said is not benign, it's harmful, and then let them take puberty blockers. So we're happy for children to harm themselves, but we're not happy for someone to gamble till they're 25. What is going on?
So you think it's a nanny state?
Of course, apart from when it needs to be.
Apart from when it needs to be. Any final comment on that, Jake?
Well, I mean, I think it's hardly 1984 when the government wants to make sure you don't ruin your life by spending too much money on William Hill, let's be honest.
Don't you think it's a slippery slope?
No, not really. I think it's the government accepting its social responsibility to ensure that its citizens can, you know, live in a fairly financially secure way.
Jason, I'm increasingly of the opinion I am living in 1984.
Me too.
It's absolutely ridiculous. The age limit of 25 is clearly absurd. The reason they've chosen that number is because it's higher than the number we've got now, and they just want to be taking people's freedoms away.
Pluck a number?
Pluck a number at random. I mean, this is what we see on the issue of smoking, for example, in New Zealand, which the government seems to be on the road to copying. It's just increasing the age every year so that nobody can ever smoke again. I'm 22 years old. I think it's a bit ridiculous that they want to stop me from being able to bet on the football if I want to for another 3 years. The vast majority of people gamble safely. This is a sledgehammer to crack a nut. It won't solve the issue of people who are genuinely struggling with addiction. It'll only make that problem worse because people will then do it illegally. This is just, it won't solve the problem. It'll make things worse. And the nanny state is having a great time with it.
Well, obviously the government is saying you're both not grown-ups, and that clearly is the message from central government. Thank you very much indeed to Jake Swinburne, Deputy Editor of the Hardy blog, and also Jason Reed, UK lead of Young Voices.